I accept my share of the responsibility in the result of the elections.
If you look at race by race, it was close. The cumulative effect, however, was not too close. It was a thumping.
I'm not recommending for every future president that they take a shellacking like I did last night.
Hello and welcome to a special edition of Planet America. I'm John Barron.
I'm Chaz the Chidello.
Today, Donald Trump formally declared he is running for president again in 2024, marking the start of what is set to be a grueling two-year campaign for the White House.
I'm a bit grueled already, John. But at least we've got a brand new sting.
Make America great again.
And we're going to be talking to Trump's former advisor, Sam Nunberg, and one of his leading critics shortly. But first...
Well, it's official. Earlier today, America's 45th president, Donald J. Trump, announced his intention to become America's 47th president. If he wins in November 2024, he would make history, becoming only the second former president to make a successful return to the White House after, as you'll recall, Grover Cleveland in 1892. Theodore Roosevelt tried in 1912 but was denied the Republican nomination, started his own party and still lost. Maybe a lesson there for Trump. Most recently, of course, Gerald Ford, who was appointed both vice president and president, never elected to anything. He considered running again in 1980 after losing in 76, but he saw that Ronald Reagan would be too tough to beat for the Republican nomination. So much history, and Donald Trump is making more. Otherwise, nobody has really ever tried to do what Trump is attempting to do now. And certainly none of them tried it after being impeached twice, refusing to concede defeat, inciting an insurrection, and possibly being indicted for stealing government secrets. But here he is.
In order to make America great and glorious again, I am tonight announcing my candidacy for President of the United States.
Well, he really did it, Chaz. He's actually off and running. No great surprise, but still pretty remarkable to see the words coming out of the face.
Well, as you said, he did rewrite history, not just what you just described, but also he rewrote his entire first term. It was extraordinary. Like, it was this everyone was happier than they'd ever been before, and they'd never experienced such great success, yet they still voted them out, which was weird.
Yes, it was very, very weird. The way that he was able to say, without any shame at all, that everything is terrible now, everything was great then, never been great, and it's going to be great again. I mean, it's a very simple message, I guess. The question is whether people can sort of just deny their lived reality enough to say. But he mentioned COVID once. He blamed China for a virus a couple of other times. They call it the China virus and all that kind of stuff. A lot of stuff we've heard before, all sort of smushed in there. But the fact that he kind of, at no point did he say we went through a great tragedy or anything. It was basically just like, China, I was beating China in a trade war, and then they gave us this virus and wrecked everything.
But we're still experiencing successes that no one had ever seen.
The economy had never been better, apparently.
The other thing was that when you say, like, right now is a disaster again, it was he kind of just rebooted exactly his first campaign, the American Carnage one. I actually wrote down the quote, "The blood-soaked streets of our once great cities are cesspools of violent crimes." Yep. I just thought, wow, he should write Pulp Fiction.
The famous quote from George W. Bush at Trump's inaugural address when he turned to Michelle Obama and said, "That was some weird shit," that pretty much applied to this speech today. We only saw about 40 minutes of it because the networks all started cutting away from it.
Yes.
Before the speech was over.
I found that very interesting, that Fox cut away from it. Even Fox Now cut away from it. That's a web station.
Yeah. Hannity himself, Trump's biggest booster, cut away from the Trump speech to say what a fantastic speech it was. He had Governor Mike Huckabee there also saying, "This is one of the greatest speeches I've ever heard that we're now talking over, so you can't hear any more of this crazy stuff."
You could literally see Trump's mouth moving right next to them while I was saying that was such a great speech.
Yeah, although it wasn't as full a return to crazy town as it might have been.
It was restrained.
Restrained to the extent that he did not go into relitigating the 2020 election result, except that he brought in a new conspiracy theory. Take a look at this one from China.
Many people think that because of this, China played a very active role in the 2020 election. Just saying. Sure, that didn't happen.
So I can only assume
what
that
that
somebody said, pull your punches after last week. You don't want to look like a sore loser. You need to focus on the future. But he was still focusing almost entirely on the past.
I do think it's interesting, though, that point about Fox News cutting away from him. Like, I know Fox is got the SADs with him at the moment, but that aside, like, that is different. What's different is that he used to be, people used to not be able to turn away from him. I feel like he's doing the same routine he's always done, and it's become less novel.
Yeah.
We're becoming slightly more used to it, which is a problem for him because his first run revolved around him dominating the media. And hey, look, we're making this show.
Sure.
But the fact is that I feel like we are at a lower level of excitement about, I'm talking the media here, about Trump than they were in 2015, 2016. And that will drop as the race goes on. This is still 2 years away.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a sense of his act really hasn't changed all that very much. There were certainly echoes of the build the wall kind of stuff from 2015, the anti-immigrant stuff, you know, talking about the foreigners bringing all the drugs in and everything else. So
It did like a war on energy, which that might work because petrol prices are a real issue.
yeah, that's true. And that was a part of everything was better under me, inflation was low, gas prices were low, and so on. But when it almost seemed as though he had a kind of a presidential announcement speech checklist. You have to have a rationale. There has to be a cause bigger than you. And in fact, he literally said at one point, which was kind of one of these Trumpian, say the quiet part out loud things, that he wasn't really doing this for him. In fact, he almost sounded as though he didn't want to be running for president again. Take a look.
I didn't need this. I had a very nice, easy life. This is something I didn't need, and a lot of you people don't need either, but we love our country, and we have to take care of our country. We have to save our country.
Now, that's kind of interesting to me. I mean, yeah, he did sort of say a few times during his presidency, you know, I had a very nice life, but I became president because I wanted to save America. So in a way, it's a riff on that, but it almost feels as though, I don't know, there was no joy in his announcement today. For the first 25 minutes or so, he was very grim-faced. He still had that kind of resentful, kind of flushed, angry look that he had on election night when he said, as a matter of fact, I did win. You know, he had a bit of that kind of anger and frustration in him. It wasn't at all joyful, I didn't think.
Look, I think that's probably a fair call. That related to what you just played, though, I was going to say, I thought he actually hit upon, I mean, this is not new, he's been saying this for a long time, but it is his strength. And we're going to get to DeSantis in a second, but it is his strength against other people who might challenge him. At one point in time, he said, I am your voice.
Yes.
And that's not bull. He is the voice of the Republican base. That is his strength. His strength, and that's the reason they keep on standing by him, even though they're not complete morons. They know his flaws.
Yes.
But they just think, you know, no one else is speaking for us. He is one of us.
And he literally said, I know you are angry.
Yeah.
You know, and so he's still trying to channel that anger.
But what I was going to say was I feel like, not talking his base here, I'm talking about more about the other Republicans who are turning against him at the moment. We saw his contradictions come out clearer. Like, I think we're used to Trump's contradictions, but we saw some of the contradictions coming out involving winning. And when you mess with winning, they start getting upset. And what I'm referring to in particular was him talking about trying to. He was all over the place with the midterms. At one point in time, he said the results were disappointing, but the other time, but then he also said we're having unprecedented success. And on Truth Social, he's been saying that Mitch McConnell blew it. But then he said, but look at my endorsements, 232 successes, 22 losses. That's an unprecedented success rate. Yeah. Well, then, so make up your mind. Did we win or did we lose?
Right.
And especially at 232 to 22, they know that's garbage because in competitive races, he won 9 out of 20, right? And so that's messing with what they eat.
Yeah.
That's messing with winning,
Yeah.
right? And I feel like that would have rung quite false to the people he's trying to pitch to at the moment.
Yeah, and he gave one brief plug to Herschel Walker running for the Senate in Georgia in the runoff next month, but completely glossing over the fact that everybody around him has been saying, don't announce before the Georgia runoff. You'll make that Georgia runoff all about you. The party will resent you even more because they believe that you cost them a Senate majority already, and now you might cost them another Senate seat.
On that note, can I just say the fact he's announcing it all is proof of his flaws, in that no one, including Trump, would have, if they knew what was going to happen in the election, chosen to go now. Right? He presumably thought the Republicans were going to have success, and he'd rub some of the glow on him as he announced. That would have been the plan. But then they weren't successful. And rather than be flexible and admit he was wrong and change tack, he just went straight ahead anyway. And that's that lack of flexibility and that pride and that stubbornness that is his flaw.
There were also some weird moments where Trump, in one breath, he was criticising Joe Biden for flubs and gaffes and everything else, and then he was making flubs and gaffes of his own. He said that Herschel Walker was fabulous.
Herschel Walker, a fabulous human being.
Now, as well as anyone could slip of the tongue, but if you're going to criticise somebody else for a slip of the tongue, you don't want to do it yourself. It looks pretty bad. The other thing that Trump was doing was we've identified this in the past. It's the sort of the Pee Wee Herman, I know you are, but what am I reflex, where he was saying, I want to bring unity to the United States. He was almost channeling Joe Biden, saying I want to restore the soul of America. He was essentially saying that that no, it's now a hellscape, and I want to get back to the sunlit uplands. It was a very strange. I mean, look, it was gaslighting 101 from start to finish, and goodness only knows, because in the last 10 minutes before the networks cut away from this thing, and let's put that in context. Extraordinary that a former president announcing they are running for president again, and the networks cut away before they've even finished. But they cut away after he had been just kibitzing and freestyling for about 10 minutes. And I think they were probably doing him a favour. I don't think, to me, that wasn't a sign of Fox News kind of getting bored with him. It was Fox News going, okay, I think he's going right off the rails now. Cue Sean, cue Sean. Oh, that was fabulous. That was fantastic. I mean, it was bizarro world, Chaz.
The only thing I'd say before we just quickly talk about DeSantis briefly is that there was one little bit of news from my perspective, which I think we should know, apart from the announcement, from what he said, which was at one point in time, he was being a bit subtle about it. He was talking about climate change not being a problem for 300 years or something.
What a relief. Apparently, sea levels are only going to rise 1/8 of 1 inch in 300 years from now.
Good news.
Everything else is cool.
Climate scientist Donald Trump. Yeah. But he said, by contrast, nuclear weapons are a big problem. And you go, hang on, what's not nuclear weapons? And the thing is, that's code. That's code for Ukraine. Because when he's talking nuclear weapons, he's talking about the threat from Russia and Ukraine. And what he's telling us, subtly, is I'm going to put pressure on Republicans to not fund the Ukraine war next year. That's what he was telling us. And so I think the current Senate should take note of that and try and pass the biggest funding bill they can now if they want to keep the war going. Because if Trump puts pressure on the Republican Congress, they will defund the war. They have Congress next year.
Yeah, that's a good call, although, my goodness, the politics of Donald Trump siding with Russia, who just invaded Ukraine, after everything else, Russia, my goodness, that's a gutsy play, Mr. President, if you opt for that now. Ron DeSantis.
Yeah, so all I want to say is that Trump's been attacking Ron DeSantis incessantly on Truth Social recently. Obviously seen him as his main competitor. Ron DeSantis finally said something. He's been silent for the last week. Through all these posts. He said something today, and this is what it was.
Well, one of the things I've learned in this job is when you're leading, when you're getting things done, you take incoming fire. That's just the nature of it. I roll out of bed in the morning. I've got corporate media outlets that have a spasm, just the fact that I'm getting up in the morning, and it's constantly attacking. And this is just what's happened. I don't think any governor got attacked more, particularly by corporate media, than me over my 4-year term. At the end of the day, I would just tell people to go check out the scoreboard from last Tuesday night. The fact of the matter is, it was the greatest Republican victory in the history of the state of Florida.
You're more entertained by Trump.
That's the problem, isn't it? I mean, Ron DeSantis is a normal politician with some kind of Trumpy policies, but he's boring. Trump is not boring.
Oh, look, he's not as entertaining as Trump, but I do feel that he plays it smart. Like, it's the smart way to play it. Like, to define Trump as being one with the media. The kind of critics carping at me while I'm just getting stuff done. And he fights the hype by just moving ahead and just getting business done, which he can do as a governor. I think it's a smart way to play if if a boring way to
Yeah,
play.
if you've got no charisma, then you say, I'm rock solid, I'm not a rock star. A lot of uncharismatic candidates over the years have tried it. It doesn't usually work, but we'll see. It's interesting, though. I want to play this little bit of Trump where he made what I think was an oblique reference, it was a pretty obvious reference, I guess, to Ron DeSantis. It wasn't directly about DeSantis, but this was, if you like, the rationale, the state of the case that presidential candidates try and put in. Why you rather than the other person? And this is Trump's argument today.
This is not a task for a politician or a conventional candidate. This is a task for a great movement that embodies the courage, confidence, and the spirit of the American people. This is a movement. This is not for any one individual.
So, a little bit like 2015, 2016, this is not the time for another politician. Now, it's a little bit trickier. It was one thing for a businessman on a reality TV show to say, well, I'm not a politician, give me a chance. He was president of the United States for 4 years. He, by definition, he was a politician, the most powerful politician on the planet for 4 years, and he wasn't particularly good on a lot of big policy issues that came along and a lot of events that happened around him. He wasn't particularly effective, but he's saying, don't worry, go with the guy who's no good again.
What I would say, though, is that I think the biggest threat to him is not the existence of Ron DeSantis per se, but there's something which we haven't seen before recently, which we're just starting to see, which is we're used to anonymous snipers from the Republican Party having a go at him and then slinking under their rocks. The real threat is when the anonymous snipers become less anonymous. Take the Wyoming Senator Cynthia Lummis, who, when asked if she would endorse Trump, said, I don't think that's the right question. I think the question is, who is the current leader of the Republican Party? Oh, I know who it is, Ron DeSantis. Ron DeSantis is the leader of the Republican Party, whether he wants to be or not. Now, whether you agree or not, the fact that a sitting senator is coming out and putting their name to that, we have not seen that before.
Yeah.
That is new.
Given that Ron DeSantis is literally just the governor of Florida, hasn't announced, but she's already saying he's the new leader of the party. Yeah, I think you're right. That's probably quite significant. Now, Sam Nunberg, he's a former advisor to former President Trump. It was Sam Nunberg who famously coined the phrase, build that wall, which of course helped define Trump's successful 2016 presidential campaign. Sam Nunberg, welcome back to Planet America.
Great to see you. Thank you for having me.
A lot of people close to Donald Trump were apparently advising him not to declare his presidential campaign as early as he did today. Why do you think he's gone this early, Sam? Is he really that worried about Ron DeSantis?
No, I don't think it had anything to do with politics. In the United States, the Department of Justice at the federal level, they have a rule where 90 days outside before an election, they won't do a political indictment. And while they were continuing to do the two grand juries for the two investigations targeting President Trump, I think that the clock starts to run and he technically could have been indicted by now. So my feeling is that he had decided that he was going to announce the week after the midterms, regardless of the outcome, because he needs to be a candidate in case he's indicted by the Department of Justice. I happen to believe he will be indicted, but that's the reason why. Essentially.
Sam, we couldn't help but notice that there was none of that kind of election denialism, voter fraud, I was robbed, it was rigged kind of talk. Maybe after last week, did somebody close to him say he should probably lay off that crazy talk for a while?
People would like to believe so, but I don't believe that's it. What I think is that he is very, very smart and he wants to be on TV. This is the best day for any campaign is when you announce that he wanted to be able to stay on the networks as long as possible. If he had brought up what the networks in the United States, a lot of them called the big lie, they would have cut him out. They would have cut away. So all the networks in the United States, the cable news networks, whether it was Fox News or CNN, they all had his announcement on for 40 to 45 minutes from 9 p.m. Eastern till 9:45, and then they went to a panel. I assure you, had he started talking that the election was stolen, they would have cut him off right then and there.
Sam, turning to that potential threat from DeSantis. We've seen a number of pushes against Trump in the past from dissident Republicans just disappear. We saw after January 6th, we saw after the Access Hollywood tapes. How are we going to know if this challenge to Donald Trump's authority in the Republican Party is serious?
In 2015, 2016, when Donald Trump was able to beat out the competition and push them aside, he was a fresh candidate, a fresh face in politics at a time when the American populace and certainly the Republican primary electorate wanted a candidate like him. We had just suffered 2 previous cycles, presidential cycles, with establishment type candidates who inevitably lost to what we viewed as a weak president / candidate in Barack Obama. Now, when we look at 2024, Donald Trump has lost 3 straight elections. So it's just not the same climate anymore. And you know what? Hillary Clinton, one of the reasons I remember sitting across from Donald in 2015, telling him why he would beat Hillary Clinton in 2014 with Roger Stone. And we said, she's an old apparatchik who only knows how to fight the last war. Donald Trump only has 5 tricks. He's 5 tricks up his sleeve, and he's not going to adapt well. So the strong money should be on DeSantis here.
OK, Sam Nunberg, we're putting that down in the book. November 16, 2022, here in Australia, you're saying Donald Trump is not likely to be the Republican nominee. Ron DeSantis is that right?
I'm saying should Ron DeSantis run against Donald Trump? Yes, Ron DeSantis will most likely be the Republican nominee. And I certainly think today, if the election were held today, he would resoundingly beat Donald Trump in the early primary states.
On that note then, let's say Donald Trump does become the nominee. If it's true that Rupert Murdoch said to Donald Trump, we will not support another run from you for president, if that's true, and if Rupert Murdoch sticks with it, which is a big if, is it possible for Donald Trump to win the presidency without the support of Fox News?
If Donald Trump were the nominee, I suppose that the facts on the ground, and particularly on Fox News, would change. But what I would tell you is when you watch Fox News today, gentlemen, it is much different when they cover Donald Trump than it used to be. And there's open criticism of Donald Trump focusing particularly on 2020. I would also say that there's a new lineup. And while Donald Trump certainly has 9 p.m. covered of Sean Hannity, Tucker Carlson at 8 p.m., Laura Ingraham at 10 p.m., they're quite independent-minded. And they've been criticized, and they've been saying, Donald Trump, you've been a very good president, but we can't keep looking and relitigating problems from the past. So, but in a nutshell, but no, the Republican nominee cannot win the presidency without Fox News. That's the short answer.
Sam Nunberg, we really appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
This week, we've also been speaking to Bill Kristol, a former advisor to Republican Presidents Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush. He's remained firmly in the never Trump camp in recent years. He even quit the Republican Party altogether over the direction it's taken in the last few years. But he says that last week's midterm election results suggest that Donald Trump can be beaten for the Republican nomination, but he concedes it won't be easy.
I think DeSantis and other Republicans have a chance against Trump in the primary. But we'll see. I mean, we don't know what's the famous expression in boxing. I think Mike Tyson, the former heavyweight champion, once said people can talk a lot about fighting a good fight, but let's see how they do once they get punched once in the face. Trump is very good at punching his opponents in the face, and we don't know how others will stand up to him in a Republican primary and how voters will react when people take on Trump. An awful lot of those Republican voters feel loyal to him and still admire lots about him, if not everything about him. So I think we're really in uncharted waters. We don't know how Trump will do in the Republican side. We don't know if Biden really will run again, though he says he wants to, but obviously he'll be 82 on election day. We don't know what this Republican House with a narrow majority will actually look like. I mean, it's a pretty unusual moment in American politics.
And Democratic Party advisor Elaine Kmark told us this week it is hard to predict what is going to happen next. But if for some reason Trump's campaign falters, we could also see Joe Biden rethink his plans of running again in 2024.
Anything could happen. Obviously, if Trump really gets weakened, I mean, if he gets indicted, look, he's got everybody's coming down on his head for his business, for his interference in January 6th, for his interference in the vote count in Georgia. He's got just a raft of legal problems. So who knows what's going to happen to him? If he really fades by 2024, it may be that people say to Biden, we need to run somebody younger, somebody who can run against DeSantis. And that, I think, would be, who knows how Joe Biden would take that.
Now, before we go, Chaz, a quick update of the midterm election results. For a fuller wrap-up, you can catch Monday night's Planet America on iView, Facebook and YouTube. Since then, the Republican Party has inched closer to securing a narrow House majority in the representatives, with 217 of the 218 they need at last count, while Democrats have, of course, retained control of the Senate, with Georgia's runoff in 3 weeks from today. Earlier today, the House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy fended off a challenge to be his party's nominee for Speaker. If, as expected, they do take that majority, it's not completely in the bag yet, though. He will still need those 218 votes on the floor of the House in January to formally take the Speaker's gavel. That's likely, but gee, you wouldn't want to bet on anything at the moment. Meanwhile, the recriminations continue over the Republican Party's underwhelming Senate results. Minority Leader Mitch McConnell is getting challenged for that role by Florida Senator Rick Scott. Now, that is a long shot bid from Scott, but it will be a bit of an indication of Donald Trump's influence over his senators, as he and Mitch McConnell are definitely at each other's throats at the moment, Chaz.
Well, to be fair, Trump's been at Mitch McConnell's throat, blaming him entirely for the Republicans' midterm disappointment, and for some reason calling McConnell's wife Coco Chow?
Yeah.
I don't understand that.
The reason is because he's racist.
Ah, that's why. Of course, yes. McConnell has quietly done the numbers in response and mumbled into his waddle. That's it.
Well, the big news yesterday was that Democrat Katie Hobbs was declared the winner of the Arizona governor's race over Trump-backed Republican election denier and former TV news anchor Kari Lake. The final margin, a little under 1 point.
Arizonans chose solving our problems over conspiracy theories. We chose sanity over chaos. And we chose unity over division.
And that was a little bit of an upset. Kari Lake had been leading the average of polls by almost 2.5 points heading into election day. She's been talking about election fraud a lot, has been for months. This was Kari Lake back at the Republican primary debate.
You've called Joe Biden an illegitimate president. What does that mean?
He lost the election and he shouldn't be in the White House.
Not surprising that Katie Hobbs refused to debate Lake at all in the campaign.
Well, that's Katie Hobbs' excuse for not debating Lake, of course. Not so clear is why she didn't debate her Democratic primary opponents either. But there are no heroes in politics, John.
No, I think the answer is because she's not a very good debater or public speaker. But still, after her defeat, Kari Lake tweeted, "Arizonans know BS when they see it," which could be a much truer statement than Kari Lake actually realises. Katie Hobbs' win gives Democrats 3 pickups now in the gubernatorial elections, although Nevada Democrat Steve Sisolak was the only incumbent to lose re-election across the 36 contests for state leaders last week. He fell about 15,000 votes behind the Sheriff of Clark County, Republican Joe Lombardo.
And that goes with a grand total of 0 incumbent senators losing as well, John. That's the first time that's happened since 1914. Very strange in an election environment where 3/4 of the voters say the country's on the wrong track.
Yeah.
But back to Kari Lake for a second. A number of Stop the Stealers have suggested that Kari Lake may have been the victim of some unspecified skullduggery.
Of course.
Of course, because she refused fewer votes than the little-known Republican candidate for state treasurer, Kimberly Yee. But that actually makes perfect sense to me. If we look at those vote tallies with pretty much everything counted now, you can see Blake Masters and Mark Fincham were easily their 2 worst candidates, both heavily associated with election denialism. Hammerday was also an election denier, but he's much lower profile. And then Kari Lake was their best candidate, but also associated with election denialism.
Completely.
Literally, the only kind of normal Republican running was Kimberly Yee, so she did the best. She did like you'd expect a Republican to do in a Democrat president's first midterm. That's kind of proof that election denialism had a very real effect on this election across the board.
Lesson not learned.
Yes. The other thing about Kari Lake's loss, by the way, is that it debunks Trump's argument that Mitch McConnell somehow lost the midterms by not giving Blake Masters $6 million more in a $150 million race. If Kari Lake couldn't get over the line, then Blake Masters, who's a far worse candidate than her, was never going to beat Mark Kelly, who, by the way, is a much stronger opponent than Katie Hobbs was. But there'll be many months to argue about that.
Yes, and happily, after next week, we don't have to pay any attention to it. That is it for this special bonus edition of Planet America. We will see you next Monday night on ABC TV at 9:35 for what will be our final episode of 2022.
And you're going to find this week's Planet America and Off the Planet on iView, YouTube and Facebook. And don't forget to catch our penultimate pep podcast for the year on Friday.
Bye-bye.